They lit up stages with voices that could melt pain into poetry. Men and women whose songs carried a generation, healed broken hearts, and turned struggle into sound. But behind the applause and the bright lights, another rhythm pulsed quietly in the background. The slow, steady burn of cigarette smoke. It followed them into studios, into hotel rooms, into the long nights where genius met exhaustion. And while their music rose, their breath slowly fell. This is the haunting truth behind 10 black R&B legends whose brilliance shook the world, but whose addiction stole the air that gave them life. Was it passion? Was it pain? Or was it slow self-destruction wrapped in the glamour of soul? As you watch, listen closely. Every voice you hear paid a price. And before we begin, hit subscribe to Secrets of Black Star so none of these stories are ever forgotten again.
Aretha Franklin, the queen whose fire could not outrun the smoke. Aretha Franklin, she was the queen of soul, the voice that could lift a nation, heal a wound, or make an entire world stop and listen. From the moment she stepped out of Detroit's New Bethel Baptist Church, her gift felt heaven-sent. But behind the power, behind the glory, a quieter addiction followed her like a shadow. Aretha began smoking as a teenager, lighting up before rehearsals to calm her nerves, a ritual she carried into fame, studio sessions, and grueling tours. By the 1980s, the cracks began to show. Her breath shortened, her stamina faded, yet she pushed through every performance as if divinely fueled. In 1998, she collapsed on stage, a warning she could no longer outrun. Aretha quit smoking that same year, but decades of damage had already taken root. Her passing in 2018 from pancreatic neuroendocrine cancer left the world grieving a once-in-a-century voice. Her legacy remains unmatched. Brilliance, resilience, and soul wrapped into one. But her story echoes a painful truth. No voice, however mighty, can outsing the harm of smoke.
James Brown, the godfather who lived loud and died breathless. James Brown was pure electricity, an explosion of rhythm, grit, and fire wrapped in one man. From I Feel Good to Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, he didn't just perform, he detonated on stage. But behind the sequin jumpsuits and the blistering dance moves was a quieter addiction: cigarettes. Brown smoked through his early years with the famous Flames, claiming the ritual helped him find the groove. His bandmates remembered him lighting up seconds before sprinting into a show, unaware of how the smoke was burning him from the inside out. By the 1970s, cigarettes and a punishing tour schedule had taken a heavy toll. James could ignite an arena, yet struggled to catch his breath backstage. Doctors warned him repeatedly, but Brown lived at full volume, even when his lungs begged him to turn it down. His death in 2006, caused by congestive heart failure and long-term respiratory damage, revealed the silent cost of decades spent inhaling more than applause. Still, his influence remains immortal. James Brown lived loud, loved hard, and left the world breathless, even as smoke slowly drained the breath from him.
Ray Charles, the genius who smoked through the darkness. Ray Charles saw the world through sound. His blindness didn't dim his vision, it sharpened it. From What I Say to Georgia on My Mind, Ray transformed emotion into melody. But the genius behind the piano carried a vice that clouded every studio he entered: cigarettes. He started young, copying older musicians at the St. Augustine School for the Deaf and Blind. What began as imitation became lifelong dependence. Recording engineers described moments when the studio haze was so thick they had to wipe down microphones. Ray claimed the smoke helped him feel the mood of a song, the grit, the hurt, the ache. But beneath that creative myth was a body slowly suffocating. In his later years, Ray's cough deepened, his breath shortened, and he often relied on oxygen between rehearsals. His death in 2004, attributed to liver disease complicated by respiratory issues, was the final note in a life spent fighting both brilliance and burden. Still, his legacy is unmatched, a reminder that even the brightest flames cast shadows. And sometimes, those shadows are smoke.
Marvin Gaye, the angelic voice torn between spirit and smoke. Marvin Gaye didn't simply sing. He revealed. From the social cry of "what's going on" to the sensual whisper of "let's get it on," Marvin's voice carried both heaven and heartbreak. But behind the elegance was a deeply personal battle. Cigarettes became his silent refuge during times of anxiety, loneliness, and unspoken pain. He often smoked between takes, convinced the haze soothed his nerves and deepened his tone. By the late 1970s, the consequences became visible. Friends noticed his constant coughing, his fatigue, and the emotional exhaustion that pressed on him. Even while recording Sexual Healing, he stepped outside repeatedly to light up, still believing smoke helped unlock his genius. His tragic death in 1984 came at the hands of his father, but the truth is this: Marvin's health had long been deteriorating. Cigarettes had chipped away at the strength behind that angelic voice. Marvin Gaye's legacy is timeless, yet his life remains a testament to how brilliance and fragility often coexist, and how smoke can suffocate even the purest breath of soul.
Jackie Wilson was pure dynamite. Known as Mr. Excitement, he dazzled audiences with vocal acrobatics and stage moves that inspired icons like Michael Jackson. But every firework burns fast, and Jackie's spark was shadowed by an addiction he never escaped: cigarettes. He smoked constantly backstage and during rehearsals, insisting it calmed his nerves before he transformed into a storm on stage. But by the mid-1960s, the cracks appeared. He began coughing through recording sessions, brushing off warnings from doctors that smoking was weakening his heart and lungs. In 1975, tragedy struck. While performing Lonely Teardrops, Jackie collapsed on stage from a heart attack. He never fully regained consciousness and spent nearly 9 years in a semi-comatose state before passing in 1984. His death was attributed to pneumonia and long-term respiratory damage worsened by decades of smoking. Jackie Wilson burned brightly, but his flame was smothered too soon. His legacy remains electric, unforgettable, and stained with the quiet cost of smoke.
Billy Paul was the velvet whisper of Philadelphia soul, the man who turned forbidden desire into art with Me and Mrs. Jones. His voice was smoky, intimate, and impossibly smooth. Sadly, that smoke was literal. Billy smoked up to 3 packs a day. Producers remembered him recording takes with a cigarette still burning between his fingers, the haze swirling around the microphone as he delivered some of soul's most tender performances. He insisted nicotine helped him feel the hurt before singing it. But by the late 1980s, the damage became impossible to hide. His breathing weakened, his phrasing faltered, and his once effortless resonance turned strained. Even when he tried to quit, the silence felt too heavy, so he returned to the flame. In 2016, Billy Paul passed away from a smoking-related lung disease. His legacy remains gorgeous, haunting, and deeply human, a reminder that even the softest voices can be silenced by the habits they love.
David Ruffin, the raspy angel who sang until the smoke stole his breath. David Ruffin was the soul-piercing cry of the Temptations, the voice behind My Girl, the sound that could melt even the hardest hearts. His rasp wasn't just style, it was emotion carved into sound. But behind that unforgettable tone was a habit he carried like a shadow:
Ruffin smoked compulsively, morning, night, in the studio, backstage, and even between takes. To him, cigarettes were comfort, focus, and fuel. To his body, they the poison. Bandmates recalled him stepping out of recording sessions just to light up, then returning with a voice equal parts brilliance and damage. By the late 1970s, his breath control had weakened. He leaned on inhalers, cough drops, and sheer willpower to keep performing. Fans heard the ache in his voice. Few realized it was real. By 1991, decades of smoking had left his lungs fragile and his heart strained. David Ruffin died from respiratory failure and cardiac arrest, a tragic ending for a man whose voice once lifted the world. His legacy remains untouchable, raw, emotional, unforgettable. But his story carries a quiet warning. Even the most beautiful voices can be silenced when smoke becomes part of the song.
Wilson Pickett, the wicked voice that burned out too fast. Wilson Pickett was raw electricity. From In the Midnight Hour to Mustang Sally, his voice could shake a room. But what fans called passion was often pain, fueled by a 2 to 3 pack a day smoking habit that ravaged him from the inside out. He smoked before shows, after shows, during studio breaks, even while writing. It gave his voice grit, but also suffocated it. By the late 1970s, Pickett's health plummeted. He lived with chronic hypertension and respiratory illness, yet refused to quit. When he died of a heart attack in 2006, doctors confirmed what his friends already knew. Years of smoking had broken his heart and lungs long before the final moment. His legacy is thunderous, but his silence came too soon.
Bobby Womack was soul's confessional poet. The man behind classics like Across 110th Street, whose voice carried the ache of a hard-lived life. But that ache came with a cost. Womack smoked constantly, often lighting up during interviews, rehearsals, and writing sessions. Producers remembered thick clouds filling the studio as Bobby recorded track after track, coughing between takes, yet refusing to pause. The rasp fans adored was, in truth, damage. By the 2000s, Womack's lungs were scarred, his stamina depleted, and his voice frayed by decades of smoke. Cancer and respiratory illness followed, leading to his death in 2014. Bobby Womack sang truth, but the smoke he trusted slowly stole his breath, one verse at a time.
Eddie Kendricks, the angelic falsetto brought down by fire and smoke. Eddie Kendricks was the angel of the Temptations, the falsetto so pure, so effortless, it felt weightless. Songs like Just My Imagination floated because Eddie did. His voice wasn't sung, it glided as if carried by something divine. But behind that heavenly tone was a habit rooted deeply in earthly struggle. Eddie smoked from his teenage years in Alabama, long before Motown polished him into a superstar. It became part of his rhythm, writing, rehearsing, and resting with a cigarette between his fingers. As the decades passed, the smoke began claiming pieces of him. His once infinite breath control shortened. His falsetto, still beautiful, grew thinner and more fragile. By the early 1990s, Eddie received the diagnosis he had quietly feared: lung cancer. Even then, he kept performing, whispering through pain, giving fans every last note he had left. In 1992, Eddie Kendricks passed away after losing a lung to the disease. His voice, immortal on record, remains a reminder of delicate genius and the brutal truth that even angels can fall when the air they breathe turns into smoke.
When we look back at these legends, it's easy to hear only the music, the soaring notes, the unforgettable hooks, the voices that shaped generations. But behind every iconic performance was a human being fighting battles most of us never saw. Talent can move mountains, but it cannot outrun the choices we make. Smoke stole breath from giants, dimmed voices that once lit the world, and reminded us that even the strongest souls are fragile.
Their stories aren't just tragedies, they're lessons. A reminder that greatness means nothing if we don't protect the body that carries it. A reminder to choose life, to choose health, and to guard our gifts before it's too late. If these legends touched your heart, honor them by living differently. And before you leave, hit like, subscribe, and share this video so their stories, their warnings, and their brilliance live on for the next generation.